There are two new demand letters that just came into TMZ. We're going to get to that in a moment. As a daughter, Savannah Guthrie returns to her job on the Today Show, holding it together on air, then stepping outside, and things kind of come apart a little bit. Savannah Guthrie had to fight through some emotion in front of the world. News reporting raising questions, continuing to about the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Did investigators start this case looking in the entirely wrong direction?
No sign of Nancy Guthrie. But tonight, a new twist that makes this case feel less like an investigation and more like a psychological puzzle no one can solve. TMZ has just released not one, but two new demand letters.
You know, I will share a little bit of news with you. The person who has been incessantly contacting us,
although
saying,
stopped for a while.
Yeah. We got another letter today from this person, an email saying, I know where her body is and who the kidnapper is. Give me half a Bitcoin and I'll tell you. And this person has been really persistent, knowing that if it's a scam, it's a federal crime.
One claims Nancy was seen alive in Sonora, Mexico. Another says she's dead. Same source, same week, contradicting itself. And police? Zero leads, zero suspects, zero clarity. This case isn't just unsolved, it's psychologically disturbing because the more information comes out, the less any of it makes sense. Tonight we're joined by a panel of veteran investigators who've seen the worst of humanity. Phil Ramos, three-time Las Vegas Officer of the Year, retired homicide detective. Bob Keeger, retired SWAT commander, Pima County. Kurt Dabb, retired homicide detective. These men have solved murders, but this case, even they are shaking their heads. Here's the question haunting this investigation. If police missed the obvious contradictions in these ransom letters, what else didn't they see? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. Global phenomenon, 50 countries, one question. Why does nothing in this case feel right? But before we get to the panel, there's something about these letters that investigators aren't telling you. TMZ, the same outlet that said weeks ago they would stop reporting on this case, has just dropped two new demand letters, sent by the same anonymous source. But here's where it gets disturbing. One letter claims Nancy Guthrie was seen alive with her abductors in the Mexican state of Sonora. The other says she's dead. Same person, same week, two completely opposite claims. And police? They've turned the letters over to the FBI, but no payment, no public response, zero leads. So the question becomes, if this is a hoax, why is the person still sending letters? And if it's real, why aren't investigators taking it seriously?
The person has been really persistent, knowing that if it's a scam, it's a federal crime.
Harvey Levin admits the person is persistent, but persistence doesn't equal credibility. Here's what makes this psychologically bizarre. The demand? Half a Bitcoin upfront, half later. Total value? Roughly $40,000. But the official reward for Nancy's safe return? $1.2 million. Why would anyone risk federal prison for $40,000 when $1.2 million is already on the table? That math doesn't add up. But wait, there's another contradiction. In the first letter, the writer writes, "Time is of the essence." Then, just days later, time is no longer of the essence. Harvey Levin called this his spidey sense moment. He said, if he was pulling a scam, why would you say time is no longer of the essence? It's a fair question. Scammers want urgency, they want panic. This person did the opposite. We asked our panel of veteran investigators to weigh in. First, retired homicide detective Phil Ramos. It just doesn't make any sense. Anything that has come out of TMZ has made no sense at all. Why even bother with the clickbait? Just call the FBI. Phil's take is blunt. It's a distraction. But retired homicide detective Kurt Dabb sees it differently. I'm kind of with Phil. It's getting ridiculous, but thankfully it's keeping the case alive. The media attention matters, keeping the case alive or muddying the waters. Here's what investigators aren't saying publicly. One letter claims the writer saw Nancy alive in Sonora. Another, from the same source, says she's dead. That's not a typo. That's a psychological red flag. Behavioral experts would ask, is this person taunting the family, or are they genuinely confused, suggesting mental instability? Either way, law enforcement has a duty to follow up. You can't dismiss something based on what you feel, because guess what? We might be wrong. You have to treat all of these things like they're legit until you can prove they're not. Bob Kager, retired SWAT commander, makes a critical point: due diligence. Every lead, no matter how absurd, must be checked. But here's the frustration. These aren't the first letters. TMZ has been getting them for weeks. They claim to forward everything to the FBI, and yet, no arrest, no suspect, no public update. So either the FBI has determined this is a hoax, or they're quietly investigating and not telling us. But if it is a hoax, why hasn't the person been traced? IP addresses can be found. Emails can be tracked. This isn't 1995. One more detail that should bother you. Harvey Levin said on air, you have to assume law enforcement doesn't believe this person is legit. Otherwise, they would have advised Savannah to pay the money. Think about that. The family of a missing woman is being told, effectively, ignore these letters. But what if they're wrong? What if this person does know something? That's the psychological torture of this case. Every new piece of information feels like a trap. Every contradiction makes you question reality. And the one question that keeps coming back: if police missed these obvious contradictions in the ransom letters, what else didn't they see? But the letters aren't the only thing that doesn't add up. Next, we look at the first 5 hours of this investigation and why experienced detectives are calling it a catastrophic failure.
Because even as we chase answers in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, real grief doesn't wait for headlines. Steve Cohen, a core member of the Surviving the Survivor family, lost his father suddenly last night. His mother passed away just months ago. 2 parents, taken within a single season. And here's the quiet, painful irony. While Steve grieves behind the scenes, Nancy Guthrie's own daughter, Savannah, returned to the Today Show today, smiling through tears. But tonight, as Steve's family mourns, the TMZ letters keep coming. Contradictions, confusion, psychological games. How heavy is today for Nancy's family, knowing someone out there is claiming they saw her alive, then dead, while investigators still have nothing? Grief on top of grief, pain on top of confusion. The STS Nation stands with Steve, and we say this clearly. This case is not just unsolved, it is psychologically disturbing for everyone touched by it. But even in mourning, the investigation moves forward. And what we're about to show you next will make you question how the first 5 hours of this case were handled.
Victory claims Nancy Guthrie's daughter did something extraordinary. She went back to work.
They've been waiting for these signs. You guys have been so beautiful. I've received so many letters, so much kindness to me and my whole family. We feel it. We feel your prayers. So thank you so much.
On the surface, a moment of strength, a woman holding it together for the cameras, for the crowd, for her job. But watch closely. The quiver in her voice, the way she looked down when she said, "my whole family." The way the crowd's love seemed to both lift her and break her. This is not just a news anchor returning to work. This is a daughter functioning while her mother is missing. And here's what makes this psychologically disturbing. The same morning Savannah returned to the Today Show, TMZ published those 2 contradictory demand letters. One claiming her mother was seen alive in Mexico, the other saying Nancy is dead. Same day, same hour almost. So ask yourself, is that a coincidence? Or is someone, the letter writer, or something darker, timing these releases to cause maximum psychological harm? We asked retired homicide detective Phil Ramos. What an incredibly strong woman that is. Your heart just breaks for her. Who wouldn't break down on that? The courage she showed going back there, it's frankly just admirable. But courage doesn't erase pain, and strength doesn't stop the questions. Man, it's part of the grieving process. It's extremely important to still carry on with your life and make it as normal as you can. And normalcy for her is going back home to New York, going back to work in front of the country and the world. I give her kudos. she's got balls of steel. Balls of steel. But even steel can crack under the right pressure. That phrase on the sign, decide and do, it comes from Savannah's mother, Nancy Guthrie's own words to her daughter, a mantra for moving forward when life falls apart. But here's the cruel irony. Savannah is deciding to move forward. She's doing her job. She's smiling through the tears. And yet the investigation behind her is stalled. Contradictions ignored. Leads going cold. Everyone deals with tragedy differently. To see her back at work, that's part of the healing process. But this is completely different than anything any of us have been through. Death is one thing. To have this happen with no answers, no closure, is completely different. No closure. That's the quiet horror of this case. Savannah Guthrie can't mourn because there's nothing to mourn yet. She can't hope because the hope is poisoned by contradictory claims. She can't even trust the people investigating because we now know the first 5 hours of the case were handled by people with no homicide experience. One of the signs in the crowd today read, "We love you, Savannah," and the nation does. But love doesn't solve a case, and strength doesn't make contradictions disappear. So we're left with the same question that has haunted every chapter of this documentary. If the police missed the obvious contradictions in the ransom letters, if they mishandled the first 5 hours, what else didn't they see? Savannah returned to work, but what she doesn't know, what the public doesn't know, is that inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, experienced detectives are calling the investigation a catastrophic failure from the very first hour. We'll show you why next.
Something was different. Not just her emotion, not just the crowd's signs, the security. Normally, the plaza is open, fans gather freely. But on day 64, only 75 people were allowed inside. Every single one went through metal detectors, every bag checked, every face scanned. Why? We asked Bob Kager, a man who's planned security for 5 U.S. presidents, to break down what was really happening behind the scenes. A personal protective detail for a morning show host. Think about that. Savannah Guthrie isn't the president. She's not a witness in a mob trial. She's a journalist. But someone, or some threat assessment, decided she needed a security detail. Here's the disturbing question. What prompted that level of protection? Was it the ransom letters, the contradictory claims about her mother being seen alive in Mexico, or something investigators haven't told the public? It's one of those things you just can't live in fear. You can't stop everything. You just look at that building directly behind them. I see literally hundreds of threats, and you can't cover them all. Hundreds of potential threats, from windows, from rooftops, from the crowd itself. But here's the psychological layer that makes this case even more disturbing. The same day security was tightened, the same day Savannah forced herself to smile, those 2 demand letters dropped. One claiming her mother was alive, one claiming she was dead. Contradictions designed to destabilize. Is the increased security a response to a credible threat, or is it a reaction to the chaos, the fear that this case has created? Because here's what we know for certain. The investigation has no suspect, no leads, no direction. And when law enforcement has nothing, they default to protection. It's not actually hard if you have the resources. It's something that when cops do this, when SWAT teams do it, it's pretty easy because you've done it so often. Easy for SWAT, but what about the toll on Savannah? To walk past metal detectors every morning, knowing someone out there is playing games with her mother's fate. This case is no longer just about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. It has become a psychological operation, whether intentional or not. Fear has spread to a morning show plaza. Security has become part of the daily routine. And the person who sent those letters, they're still out there, watching, waiting. But the security around Savannah isn't the only thing that doesn't add up. Next, we go inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, where veteran detectives say the investigation was botched from the very first hour. And one question haunts them all. If the police missed this, What else didn't they see?
Before the TMZ letters, before the metal detectors and the security detail, Savannah Guthrie stood in front of her church congregation, and she said something that few public figures dare to admit. Deep disappointment with God. Utter abandonment. These are not the words of someone who has lost faith. These are the words of someone whose faith is being tested to its absolute limit. Here is the psychological reality of this case. It doesn't just destroy families, it shakes the very foundations people stand on. Savannah grew up with faith. Her mother, Nancy, was a woman of deep belief. But 64 days without answers, contradictory ransom letters, police with zero leads? How does anyone reconcile that with a loving God? We asked retired homicide detective Phil Ramos, a man who has seen the darkest corners of human behavior, how he wrestles with faith after decades of investigating murder. Phil Ramos is not an unbeliever. He is a man who has struggled, honestly, painfully, with the question, if God is good, why does he allow this? And if a seasoned homicide detective can't answer that, how can Savannah? Kurt Daub, who has been open about his own mental health struggles, recently re-enlisted in his faith. Hope, even in the face of contradictions. Faith, even when logic says give up. But here's what makes this case psychologically disturbing in a way that transcends evidence and suspects. Savannah said, life itself seems far harder than death. Think about that. She is not afraid of her mother being dead. She is afraid of not knowing, of the waiting, of the contradictions, of the feeling that God has abandoned her even when she knows, intellectually, that's not true. This case has done something rare. It has made a faithful woman question her creator. It has made veteran homicide detectives doubt the system they served. It has turned a morning show plaza into a fortress. And the person who sent those letters, they knew exactly what they were doing. People are horrible. That is not a theological answer. That is an investigative one. And it leads us back to the same question. If the police missed the contradictions in the ransom letters, if the first 5 hours of the investigation were botched, if a faithful family is now questioning God, what else didn't they see? Savannah still believes, the panel still hopes, but inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, a different kind of crisis is unfolding, one that may explain why this case has gone absolutely nowhere. That story next.
Addictions, the psychological torture of a family waiting, the return to work, the security, the faith that's been shaken. But now, we go to the heart of the darkness, the investigation itself. News Nation's Brian Enton spoke with a law enforcement source, someone inside the know, too afraid to show their face. And what they revealed is not just disturbing, it's catastrophic. The first 5 hours, while Nancy Guthrie was missing, while her family was panicking, while evidence was cooling or being destroyed, the people in charge assumed she had wandered off, like an elderly person with dementia. Not a victim, not a kidnapping, not a homicide. And here's where it gets worse. The source told Brian Enton that the first supervisor on scene had never investigated a homicide, never been lead on a murder case, never. Let that sink in. The person in charge of the most critical hours of this case had never done the job they were supervising. Zero experience, zero homicide leadership. And the result? They didn't secure the scene. They had to go back multiple times because they missed things. What did they miss? We may never know. Sheriff Chris Nanos, elected official, and according to multiple sources, including his own command staff, a man who believes anyone can do any job. But here's the psychological layer that makes this not just incompetence, but disturbing. The anonymous source said there is no direct suspect, no name on the table. 64 days, and police are still nowhere. No suspect, no scene security, no experienced leadership, and a sheriff who installed friends, not merit, into key positions. A recall petition, Citizens trying to remove an elected sheriff while his department is failing a missing person case. And what about the commanders who stay silent? This case is not just unsolved, it is psychologically disturbing because the very people meant to solve it may have broken it from the inside. First 5 hours wandered off. No suspect, no secured scene, inexperienced supervisors, a sheriff who values mediocrity over excellence. This case is not unsolved. This investigation itself feels psychologically disturbing. If the police missed the obvious contradictions in the ransom letters, if they mishandled the first 5 hours, if they still have no suspect after 64 days, what else didn't they see? We asked the panel one final question. Is there any hope left? Their answer, and what happens next in this case, will be our final chapter.
A family clinging to faith, a daughter returning to work behind metal detectors, and an investigation that, by the admission of insiders, was mishandled from the very first hour. No suspect, no secured scene, no experienced leadership, no answers. We began this documentary with a question. We end with the same one. Why does nothing in this case feel right? This case is not just unsolved, it is psychologically disturbing, because every new detail, every letter, every contradiction, every revelation about police failure makes the truth feel further away. But here's what we know for certain. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her family is still waiting. And someone out there, the letter writer, or worse, knows exactly what happened. The panel's message tonight is simple. Don't look away. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers. Because when an investigation fails, public pressure becomes the only remaining tool. Before we go, a programming note. There is another missing woman whose story is just beginning to surface. Amy Hilliard, a coffee shop owner from Oakland, missing for 2 weeks now. Her husband has spoken out. The circumstances are strange. And next episode, we'll bring in a geoprofiler to break down what investigators may be missing. But tonight, our hearts are here, and with Steve Cohen, our colleague, our friend, who lost his father suddenly. Steve, we're with you. The STS Nation stands as a family. Grief and injustice have a way of intertwining, but so does hope. This case is not just unsolved, it is psychologically disturbing. What feels the most wrong to you? The contradictory letters? The police failure? The silence? Comment below. Let's keep asking together. If you're interested in real investigative crime stories like this one, where we dig deeper than the headlines, consider subscribing for more deep dive documentaries. Day 64. We're still watching. We're still asking.